My friends and I live in a very nice area. Try and picture the quintessential suburban neighborhood. It's relatively quiet and people are used to the secluded, isolated feel it provides. The last place you'd expect anything dangerous to really happen. With the exception of what I'm about to tell you, my town radiated the calming silence you'd eventually come to crave. This happened a few summers ago, and as much as I try to resist it, I will never be able to erase the memory from my mind. Anyway, my friend Lionel and I had always been those kids to try to cause trouble wherever we could. Looking back, I struggle to justify our behavior. I guess it was our teenage manifestation of a rebellious spirit or some shit like that. We lived on the same street and hung out after school every single day. Because our neighborhood consisted of nothing but very large houses and towering trees, we didn't usually have much to do on weekdays, unless we wanted to journey a few towns over. So we ended up making our own fun most of the time. In our neighborhood, there was a well known mansion at the top of a hill that had been abandoned for as long as people could remember. It wasn't really special. Every kid who lived in my town had been inside. The rooms were essentially stripped of anything of value, and finding a wall that wasn't coated with multiple layers of spray paint was almost impossible. It was especially creepy because it stood at the edge of a massive cemetery. For Lionel and I, this cemetery mansion was a kind of default. If we had nothing else to do, we'd throw some graffiti up inside or just smoke and chill on the roof. This was one of those nights. It was like 2 a.m. on a Saturday, and Lionel and I had just been flaked on by a couple of girls that we made plans with. The two of us were kind of upset, so we figured chucking rocks at the cemetery mansion would be a decent way to release some energy. Had we been sober, we might have been more cautious about doing something so stupid. But it was late, it was summer, and we didn't care. I convinced Lionel not to drive. We were more than a little drunk, and after about a 30-minute walk, we crested the hill and were met with a familiar yet eerie sight. Vines twisting and hanging down the muddied bricks, most of the windows shattered, menacing points at the tip of the roof. Definitely a sinister feel, especially at such an ungodly hour of the night. Without warning, Lionel picked up a stone and chucked it towards the house. It sailed gracefully before smashing through one of the fourth floor windows. It was difficult to confirm in the low light of the moon and surrounding streetlights, but the deafening sound of the shattering glass confirmed it. Gleefully, I picked up a rock and did the same, puncturing one of the second floor windows. Before the mansion's fifth floor, there was a single small window, probably an attic, that stood lonely as the highest room in the house. Lionel challenged me to hit it. I missed a good 10 throws before giving up with an aggravated sigh. Lionel grinned, picked up a rock, and said, "Watch this." He took a long look at the tiny target and launched it. I watched in awe as the rock flew through the air, shattering the attic window with a satisfying crash. I was shocked. The two of us stood there for a second, admiring what just happened. Lionel was about to pick up another rock when I, still looking at the shattered window, saw a dark object fly out of the emptiness and sail down towards us. I literally jumped, confused as to what I just saw. Lionel and I looked down at the rock that had just landed on the gravel in front of us. The exact same rock Lionel had just thrown. It was easily recognizable. The two of us stood there in silence, obviously a little shaken up. It was really late for other kids to be doing the same thing we were, but that was the only explanation we could come up with. We agreed that it must have been a group of teenagers trying to mess with us, an idea that actually excited us. The devious grins on our faces told the story. We were going to try and get the jump on them before they could scare us. The two of us quietly made our way to the front door, ducking under a thick vine that hung from the towering pillars above. The door was slightly ajar, but it always was. It had long since been misaligned from its hinges and didn't close properly. As quietly as we could, we stepped inside, our eyes adjusting to the minimal light and our noses to the smell of mildew and rotting wood. We slowly made our way up the creaky stairs, unable to silence the sound of shifting wood beneath our feet. We had made it to the fourth floor and were positioned at the base of the final staircase. Interestingly, we had never been up there. The entrance to the roof was on the opposite side of the house, and this room must have eluded us. Lionel took the lead, and I followed directly behind. The staircase led to a small wooden door, which we presumed was the attic door. Lionel put a hand on the doorknob and even looked back at me. I nodded, and in one fluid motion, he flung the door open. Before I could even see anything, I was struck by the smell that made me take a few reactionary steps backward. It was disgusting. It smelled like death and rot. Something was clearly decaying in that room. Lionel covered his nose and entered. I was a little more hesitant to do so, but I decided that I'd rather be by his side than alone on a pitch black staircase. The sight was even worse than the smell. We found ourselves staring at a tiny room, the floor of which a white pentagram was painted. There were a few unlit candles and a closet door that we didn't open. The smell seemed to be emanating from that closet, and I was worried Lionel would want to investigate more. To our surprise, the room was void of people. I had enough, though. This was really starting to freak me out, and I couldn't fight the urge to leave any longer. I turned towards the door, and that's when I saw it. I looked down the staircase and saw two cloaked figures looking back up at me. I cursed and ran towards Lionel. Just then, we heard stomping up the stairs from behind us. We were screwed. As the stomping got closer to the door, I was prepared to fend off whoever it was, bracing myself for a fight. Just then, Lionel yelled at me, "Dude, come on!" I whipped around to see Lionel halfway out of the shattered window, presumably stepping on the roof. I hurriedly did the same, and the second I made it onto the roof, I heard the door forcefully open. We ran across the roof to the entrance we knew about, not wanting to wait to see if we were being followed. Had this situation not been so dire, I don't know if I would have been able to go through with our plan. The darkness made it nearly impossible to see. One wrong step, and we would have been sent tumbling to our deaths. I followed close behind Lionel, and we made it to the roof entrance. It was a little hatch that led to a ladder. Lionel failed to open the hatch up. It was locked from the inside. Just then, we heard a booming voice ring out from somewhere in the distance. "They went that way," yelled a freakishly deep voice. To this day, it was the scariest thing I've ever heard anyone say. Without thinking, I stomped on the hatch as hard as I could with my right foot, and it gave way in a crash loud enough to reveal our position to anyone in the house, let alone someone chasing us on the roof. The force of the impact caused me to fall into the hole, and had it not been for my hands reflexively grabbing the ladder, I wouldn't have been seriously hurt. Lionel screamed at me to go, so I climbed down as fast as I could, trying to ignore the pain in my leg. The two of us sprinted down the other staircase and burst out of the back door, jumping the fence and running into the cemetery. Lionel seemed to be fine. He was literally laughing. I, on the other hand, was so scared I could barely think. I never thought squatting behind a gravestone in a cemetery could be so comforting. Lionel and I maintained a watchful eye on the mansion, half expecting someone to be following us. We waited, and just when we thought the coast was clear, we saw a group of 6 or 7 cloaked figures circling the property, frantically searching under bushes and trees. The two of us crept closer into the cemetery until we were sure there was no chance we could be spotted in the darkness. We hopped the backside fence and haven't been back to that house since. I can only assume that we stumbled upon some kind of cult meeting or ritual. Why they decided to do it in an abandoned house is something I still ask myself. There was a house by me nicknamed Ghost House because construction was never finished on it for the longest time, and it had been sitting vacant and unfinished for years. It was on an already kind of sketchy block with a lot of houses that appeared to be either vacant or the owners of the houses just don't care about their properties because there's a lot of overgrown grass and weeds. My friends Annie, Mickey, Leica, and I were bored just driving around town late one night. We got some fast food, then Mickey floated the idea of checking out the ghost house. Like actually checking it out going inside. The girls were on board, and so, of course, so was I too then. We parked a few houses down. This street only had one street light, the rest of it was dark, and a lot of the houses didn't have any lights on. So it really was a dark and kind of creepy block. Like I said, the neighboring houses seemed abandoned too, even though they weren't due to cars being in some of the driveways. We were all sure to be extra quiet getting out of the car and walking over to the ghost house. Seeing this unfinished 2-story house in the dead of night gave off eerie vibes for sure. Next up, we had to figure out a way in. Of course, we tried the front door, and it was locked. We then walked around the house trying every window until one of them slid right open. Annie was the smallest, so she climbed in through the window and then went to unlock the back door for us. only it was already unlocked, meaning anyone could have just walked right in. We entered the house that smelled like a mix of wood and some kind of rotten cat piss kind of smell. The first floor was a lot more finished than I was expecting, and it was pretty big with lots of rooms, but there was no furniture. We kind of all split up going different ways. I went up the stairs to the second floor, and up here was a bit more unfinished, with a lot of the wall framing exposed. I heard rustling around from downstairs, the sounds of my friends being a bit too loud, so I went really loud down the stairs. Upstairs was pretty empty, so I went back down to run into Annie, who asked what's upstairs. I said it's a bit unfinished up there. She then proceeded to go upstairs and check it out anyway. I proceeded to look for the basement, and I found it beyond a brown door right under the stairs leading upstairs. As soon as I opened it, I got a whiff of that cat piss type smell I was talking about. I started walking down the steps, and as I got to the bottom, I could see the basement looked a little more decrepit than the rest of the house. The concrete floor was stained with some brownish, rusty looking material. My first instinct was to think paint, but the color could also match blood. I looked around the mostly empty space and found in one corner a small wooden chair and a little table with a book on it. It was the Holy Bible. I heard footsteps coming down the steps. I said in a volume slightly above a whisper, "You come check this out." When I heard no response, I turned around but didn't see anyone by the stairs. I said, "Who's there?" Then I noticed a girl sitting down leaning on the wall. Only it took me a second to realize it wasn't Annie or Leica. It was some random woman with extremely long and messy hair looking right at me. Then I heard one of the girls upstairs screaming, followed by Mickey calling my name saying, "Let's get out of here." The only words I could muster up were "holy shit," and I ran out of the basement and up the stairs. I saw my friends running out through the back door. I had no idea what they had seen, but I was right behind them. We ran back out front towards the car and didn't stop until we were in. I asked them as we started to drive away what they saw because I saw some deranged looking woman come down to the basement. Everyone was talking over each other, but one of the girls finally managed to explain that they saw two men standing in one of the empty rooms on the first floor. They saw some dark objects on the floor in that room, but they couldn't find out what they were in those brief seconds before running away. They didn't get a look at their faces, but they were men based on their statures. I don't know what the hell was going on in that house, and if we ran into some satanic cult, or if we just ran into some homeless people. You couldn't pay me to ever go back to that house again. I don't live in that town or state anymore, so I don't know what became of that house. This was the year 2019 when I was rushing a frat in college. Towards the end of our pledge process, our entire pledge class took a trip to an abandoned hospital a few towns over. It was a sort of tradition that each pledge class would do. I carpooled with a few of my pledge brothers. There's honestly just too many names to list, so I'll just name my pledge brother that I spent most of the night with, Broho. Brojo and I and a couple others carpooled to the hospital, which sat next to a big park. So all of us parked in one of the parking lots in the park. We waited till everyone was there, then started walking down a pathway in the direction of the hospital until the pathway cut right. And at this point, we had to walk through the small patch of wood separating the park from the hospital. I honestly wore the wrong shoes for this. I was complaining about wearing my white Air Force Ones. After making our way through the woods, we got to the property of the hospital, surrounded by trees and a parking lot on all sides. Seeing such a tall building, once full of people and lights, standing completely dark in the night was really creepy. It was my first time ever exploring this building. A couple of the guys in the group knew the secret ways in, one of which being simply climbing through one of the lower windows that was smashed through. I followed close to the back of the group. One by one, we stepped down through this window, leading to a level beneath the ground. The floor on this level was wet, making me really regret my shoe choice now. Brosho and I stayed in the back, following behind the rest. There were like 15 of us, so being in such a large group took away most of the scariness of being in a place like this. We went up the stairs. Everyone's steps echoed through the we traversed the creepy hallways that had been abandoned for decades. The walls surprisingly not littered with graffiti. Jordan, one of the guys who was very experienced with this place, said not a lot of people break in because no one thinks to cut through the park to avoid the security in front of the parking lot. Eventually, the group started to split up a little bit. A small group of guys went this way, a small group of guys went that way. We were on, I think, the second floor when Brojo and I decided to go down this separate hallway corridor. Some of the rooms in this place seemed like they hadn't even been gone through since the place closed down. Others looked like they had been rummaged through and had small amounts of graffiti in them. Brojo and I were in a hospital room with the bed and medical equipment still in there when we heard someone walk past the doorway to the room. We both turned and caught just a glimpse of a black shadow walking past the door out of view. We both looked at each other, then said, "Yo, who is that?" I walked into the hall, and at the end of it, I saw someone standing there. I couldn't tell if they were facing me or facing the wall. All I saw was their body. I said, "Who is that?" Then whoever it was walked into the room next to them. Broho came into the corridor now and was confused at what I saw. I told him someone was here, and we should just go back to the group. We left down the opposite direction, back towards our group. We eventually started to hear the echoing voices of our pledge brothers. As we were getting closer, all of a sudden there was an almost deafeningly loud, blood-curdling scream of a woman coming from the direction we just came from. If I had to describe the screams, it sounded like a woman being brutally stabbed to death. I noticed the sounds of our pledge brothers went silent now, or maybe the screams just overpowered the sounds of their voices. We ran back towards our friends and screamed, "Go." All of us ran back downstairs to the lower level where we entered from. Somehow I found myself in the back of the group again. One by one, we all crawled out from that window. The screaming stopped, but now we heard footsteps stomping down the stairs. They weren't the footsteps of anyone in our group. I was screaming, "Go! Hurry up!" Finally, after Broho crawled out, I crawled out. The whole time fearing someone would grab my feet, we booked it back towards the cars through the woods. After we got to the cars and caught our breath, I told everyone I saw a person in the corridor where Broho and I were. That's where the screams were coming from. We all left shortly after that, definitely freaked out. I'm not really interested in urban exploration anymore.